Who Jumbo Espresso Talk Today community. It's Amma Robin here. Aquaba to our great and groundbreaking show. Welcome to the Espresso Talk Today show. This week, Espresso Talk Today is returning to a topic that we haven't approached in a very long time. Financial empowerment. You may recall that we've had a series of meetings about financial literacy with George Gaines from Wealth Wave International. Using the book How Money Works, Stop Being a Sucker, and tapping into Jorik's excellent insights and unbounded energy, we discussed the wealth mindset and specific steps to take to obtain wealth, to keep wealth, and, this is exciting, build intergenerational wealth. Those episodes were really great, and I hope that you followed his excellent advice. Well, Jorg Gaines is not joining us today. I know after all that, Jorg isn't with us today. Today, we have Kim Bradley, who is a financial aid advisor. Let me explain. I'm sure that you've heard about President Biden's steps to forgive some of the student loans that are weighing down so many students long after the graduation. Yep, he is taking off some of their loans, forgiving some of that debt, and that's amazing. Personally, I think that all student debt should be forgiven or canceled so that graduates can take a job that they love rather than one that'll just help them repay their loans, that would allow people to buy homes, and that'll simply give graduates a fresh and empowered start in their careers. Well, I'm sure that you agree that that's a good idea. Okay, well, we're not at student debt cancellation or, imagine this, free tuition. We're not there yet. The United States is not there yet. This is not just a fantasy. Other countries are doing this. It is possible. But the United States isn't there yet, so most students need to rely on financial aid to pay for higher education. For many students, in fact, financial aid is the only way that they can afford to go to college. And I'm speaking from experience. I needed financial aid for college and law school in the United States. Listen to this though. I did not need it for my master's degree in law at the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. Tuition was state subsidized, so it was very low cost. Practically nothing. Yes, I still had other expenses like housing and supplies, and I struggled a bit with that, but tuition was basically nominal. Okay, but back in the United States, as I said, most students require financial aid. As helpful as financial aid is, though, it is not a panacea. It has advantages, yes, but it also has problems and disadvantages. Navigating the financial aid metaspace is often confusing and frustrating. Many high school counselors simply do not have the expertise to help all the students know about their financial aid choices, the best financial aid route to take, and which types of financial aid to avoid. Yet, this is a decision, or a series of decisions really, that will affect their financial future long after graduation. It will affect their ability to buy a house and to make other financial decisions. This is another form of financial literacy, and it's really important to learn it and to implement it, as George Gaines would say. Well, this is why Kim Bradley is joining us today for an uncommon conversation about understanding financial aid. Ms. Bradley is an experienced financial aid advisor. She's been advising and assisting students and their families in all things financial aid for more than 25 years. She's seen the changes and developments in the field, and she's witnessed many students and families make mistakes that affect their financial futures simply because they didn't have the knowledge or support they needed during the process. So, Kim is going to help us understand the basics of financial aid, and she'll return next month to go into more detail about issues like alternatives to financial aid or loans and repayment options. This will be, I promise you, this will be one of the most uncommon conversations we've had. As Kim said, people often don't talk about these issues. Young people are often left to find their own way in this process. Older people think that it doesn't apply to them. Both groups are wrong. Let's just get over the awkwardness of talking about money and financial support. Asante Sana to Kim Bradley for joining us, for joining our show, and to you, my community, for being in the building today. So without further ado, let's get to it. Hey, Mel.
Hi, Robin. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. And you?
I am doing absolutely great.
You always are, and I'm glad to hear that. And as you can see, I'm having an espresso with a dear friend, Kim Bradley. Do you remember Kim?
I do. I really do. Boy, how lucky am I to be here at this time?
Yeah, well, Kim, you remember my mother Mel?
Yes, I do. And it's such a treat to be able to see her again.
Well, I think we're all very lucky here too, because not only so great to see Kim, but also because Kim is a financial aid advisor. And you remember here at the Espresso Talk today, we've been talking about financial empowerment issues. And we've talked with Jorg Gaines from Wealth Wave about the wealth mindset and about saving and investing. And we've talked with some people about investing in the stock market. But there is a group that we haven't focused on enough, and those are students or other people who want to go into higher education. And now President Biden has made this a big issue. It's always been a big issue, but now people are talking about it because, he's actually giving people a little bit of relief. So I just want to ask Kim, because I'm very curious about this. You know, I guess you just saw in the future. How did you become a financial aid advisor? What led you down this path, this
I,
career path?
piv- I pivoted from the advertising world. I found it to be too demanding, even for my young 21-year-old self. The 14, 15-hour days had become too much. I had lost my grandmother, and my employer was not sensitive to that at all. And in speaking with my mother about it, my mother said, you need to find a career where you can help people. And I thought, okay, well, I'll either go into education or the healthcare field. Well, I picked education. This was some 30 odd years later. And here we are.
Well, the wisdoms of mothers. And yeah,
Absolutely.
and we're so
Yes.
glad that you're here. And I do want to ask you, um, just I mean, I've gone through some higher education myself, but I really couldn't say what financial aid is. So would you answer just that basic question first, please?
Okay. So financial aid is funds are comprised of funds that primarily come from four different sources. The first being the federal government, the Department of Education. The second being states. The third, private donors. The fourth would be nonprofit organizations.
Oh.
So this is where the funds primarily come from. In mentioning, I want to mention, and this is something that's hardly discussed, is on the federal and state side, those funds, the schools are actually required to be eligible to have those funds pass through their campus. So it's heavily regulated. Most common financial aid for students across the United States is the Pell Grant. And this is given to the most neediest students. And we'll talk about needy later on. And then you have state grants. And then you have federal work study, which is where a student can work on or off campus using federal funds. And the benefit to that is those earnings do not count against the student on future financial aid. Because oftentimes you will offer work study to students and students will sass back and say, well, how is that financial aid if I have to work? Well, it's not going to count against you in the future. Now, I want to be clear that it must be reported, but reported in the right place, but it will not be counted against you. The other thing I want to mention is scholarships. And oftentimes, I'm going to talk about the Black community here. Oftentimes I have Black parents, Black students, that's all they focus on is, how can I get a scholarship? Are there scholarships for Black people? Yes, but that's a very narrow approach to applying for scholarships. Some of the best advice I got early on in my career is students need to think of everything that they are. Perhaps you can find a scholarship based on your religion, your gender, your major, where you live, if your parents served in the military. And having said that, there is a website that will do the searches for you, where you would complete a series of questions about yourself. The search engine goes out into the Google universe, if you will, and find scholarships that you should apply for. I did this for my son, and we got 74 results that he should apply for, different scholarships that he should apply for. Excuse me. The website where you can find this search engine is Big Future, BIGFUTURE.org. It's a nonprofit organization. There's no cost. This is also a college planning website. So you can do practice SAT. You can compare colleges side by side. There are drawings just for participating in that website and looking for colleges and taking practice SAT.
Wow.
Well, that's absolutely amazing. So when should a person start this process of applying for financial aid?
Students need to investigate the schools that they want to go to first. And here's the reason I say that. Oftentimes, schools will have money outside of the federal and state grants. So they may have their own money from their own benefactors who have been generous and given, but there may be certain deadlines that they need to meet. So it's very important to read the websites on each college that you plan to attend. The federal government requires eligible colleges to disclose what financial aid is offered at their school and when the deadlines are. I want to mention something about the deadlines and when a student should apply. The application period for financial aid for the 23-24 academic year opened October 1st. So students who want money for next fall, they need to apply now. Now, oftentimes in Black community, we will ask, when is the deadline? And I want people to stop that thinking and stop that questioning, because it's like asking, what time does the movie end? Okay, so the later you wait, the less you're going to get. In addition, your financial aid offices are not going to have much sympathy for you if you have leftover money or not enough money or late money, because the application period opened October 1st. One of the things I often tell students at one of the schools I worked at, we would get about 100 applications a day. You wait 5 days, you're 500 students behind. That's the way to look at it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. The other thing I want to emphasize on when to apply for financial aid, you don't need to be enrolled at a particular school, and you don't need to be accepted into a particular school. What you're doing is simply trying to gauge what you're being eligible for should you go to a particular school. A lot of schools, especially competitive schools, and when I say competitive, your Ivy Leagues and some of your larger universities, Ohio State, those kind of schools, they use financial aid as a recruiting tool. How quickly can we tell this person what we can offer them?
Wow. Wow.
So can I just go to the high school counselor and just get all that information in one place?
Yes and no. One of the things I want to caution students and parents is to rely on one person for all of the information. It is possible they may be able to give you all the information, but it is a lot of information to get from one person. And if it is a high school counselor, can they do that individually, or is there a workshop or something someone can go to?
Right, right. I need to back up a little bit because you started off by talking about or mentioning the Pell Grant.
Yes.
Can you mention that? That's come up a lot with, like I said, because of Biden. So I'd like to know a little bit more about that one.
Okay, so the Pell Grant is given to the neediest students. And we'll talk about how need is defined later on. The grants do not need to be repaid. And I'm going to put an asterisk next to that because the only time they need to be repaid, let's say that your school has given you a Pell Grant, you attend classes for 3 days and then you drop out. We want that money back. The other thing, this was a quid pro quo. We give you the money, you're supposed to be in class. The other thing that will require us to request a repayment on a Pell Grant is if you were a little creative with your answers and we found out you shouldn't have been that creative. We want that money back.
Okay.
So for currently, the maximum Pell Grant for a full-time student is $6,825. And that is applicable to all colleges in the 50 states, Guam, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands.
Okay.
So if you're going to a very expensive school, of course you're going to get a little nervous because that's not enough money. But I can talk about how that need is met.
So is that the maximum per year or maximum total?
That is the maximum per year. And thank you for asking that question because I did neglect to mention when you asked, when should a student apply for financial aid? Financial aid, students have to apply every academic year. So from undergrad, let's say you want to be a doctor, from undergrad all the way through medical school, you will need to apply for financial aid every October 1st. That's when the application period opens.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I don't know. I still think, about financial aid. I mentioned before that when I was thinking of undergrad, I just said I'll rely on my parents because it was a state school and it wasn't very expensive. But for graduate school, it was quite expensive. And I just said I'm going to apply for as many loans as possible and these federal loans. And I got them all because, I did. And I ended up with a lot of money, which for a student, I was dancing in the streets. But now afterwards, repayment. How do I know? Yeah, that's an issue. We'll talk about that one, I think, next time. But
Yes.
how does a person know when they really, what financial aid they need and how much, whether they even need it and how much?
Okay, so let's go back to the school's websites that are mandated by the federal government. The schools are required to disclose how much it costs to attend there. Now, when we mention cost, and this is very important to put on the sticky side of your brain for the audience there, the federal government requires 5 components to be taken into consideration for what the student needs. The first is tuition and fees. The second, books and supplies. Third, transportation. And I want to be clear on the transportation. We cannot give financial aid to purchase a car. When we mention transportation cost, we're looking at perhaps public transportation or the maintenance of a vehicle and gas. Mm-hmm. And the maintenance of the vehicle would be regular maintenance, oil change, and whatnot. You want to put on fancy rims, financial aid's not going to pay for that. The other thing is miscellaneous expenses, and that would include things like laundry and personal hygiene items. And then you have room and board. How much is it going to cost you to live on campus or off campus in the neighborhood in which the college or university resides? And then meal plans, or the average cost that a student spends on meals. So all of these components have a total. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, let's say we're looking at Bradley University, myself, okay? My school, with all of those components, costs $50,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the other thing that's important to put on the sticky side of your brain, whatever that cost of attendance is, we cannot exceed that. So you will see a lot of articles about, high achieving students that got, $1.4 million offered in scholarships. Do they get to use that all? No, because the cost of attendance works very much like a credit limit. You may have a credit card to a certain store, but you can't buy everything in the store. Whatever limit you have, that's how much you can use.
Interesting. Yeah, because I have heard about that. Yeah, getting millions of dollars. And I thought, what do they do with all of that?
Yeah, it's just an offer, because you can only get financial aid at one school at a time. You can't do two schools at a time. And oftentimes you'll have students, especially with freshmen, because they've applied multiple places, they get accepted and they enroll at one or more institutions, and then it becomes a problem. Now it's sand in the machine. It's almost a standoff. Which school's going to pay this back?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I noticed you're in the cost of the things that are included. You didn't mention travel expenses. For example, say I'm in the state of Washington and I get accepted to a school in Florida. I mean, I have to have some kind of transportation to get there. Is that included?
Yes and no. You can file that under miscellaneous. And I don't know if I mentioned miscellaneous being one of the components is the cost of attendance.
Yeah, okay.
And the reason I say miscellaneous is because not every student is going to come from out of state. These costs, aside from tuition fees, room and board, are based on averages. So a school, the private schools, typically, they will do surveys of their students. They will look at what are the housing costs in the neighboring communities of that college. For state schools, for example, for where I'm from California, the state tells us this is how much it costs for room and board, etc.
Wow.
I also want to mention that some students do not need all of those things covered. Maybe they just need help with tuition, or maybe they just need help with housing. So you don't have to take all that is offered to you. Because schools, especially being competitive, they will want to show we can cover all these costs. So let's go back and look at some of the types of financial aid I talked about. So let's pretend we have Joe Sixpack here. He's applied to go to Ohio State. Okay. We give him a Pell Grant for $6,825, but he still needs money to reach, let's say, that $50,000. The formula requires that you give what they call need-based, which means somebody's financially needy, and we can talk about how that's determined in another segment, first. And the reason is, years ago, some colleges didn't like the way you looked, so I'm going to give you all loans. I like the way that person looks, so I'm going to give them grants. So the federal government had to step in and say, oh, no, you need to give the best money first. So that's money that doesn't need to be repaid. So that would be the Pell Grant and the scholarships. You give that first. The next in line is federal work study. And there are some colleges that also have their own money in addition to federal work study, which is called college work study.
Okay.
College work study. And then there's did I mention scholarships already? No, I did.
Yes, you did.
We had Pell, scholarships, federal work study, and then the backfill is loans. So this is where a lot of people get into trouble, because they figure if it was offered to me, I should go ahead and take it. Or they're using it. I've seen a lot of abuse of student loans. Ski trips, home remodel, jewelry, strip clubs.
What?
Those. And here's what's interesting about that. In recent years, most schools will give these funds to students on a debit card. The federal government does what they call these blind studies to find out where this money's been spent. And one of the most popular places are tattoo parlors.
Really? Oh my gosh.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yes. So prior to COVID, there was a lot of talk about how we can morsel out this money so that students are not misusing it. And there was even one proposal that it would be doled out like a paycheck.
Oh, okay.
Post COVID, there's been no talk about that anymore. Got other issues.
Wow.
Well, if a Pell Grant is, say, 68.25, it goes to the neediest students. Since that's not enough to cover, say, most college tuitions that I know about, then you have to have a Pell Grant, some loans, a combination of things. How does that work?
Absolutely. Um, when a student applies for financial aid, I'm going to use an example of two different types of colleges on how it's handled. Okay. So let's pretend we have somebody going to USC,
Mhm,
University of Southern California, which is a private institution.
mhm,
There are two foundational applications for for financial aid that students need to utilize to get money. The first being the FAFSA. A lot of people have heard of the FAFSA, and what it's actually an acronym. It stands for free, and I want to put emphasis on that, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Application for federal student aid. And the word free is utilized because many years ago, students used to have to pay to apply for financial aid.
mhm,
The FAFSA is pretty much like seeds. You're going to spread these seeds. Let's see what grows. Okay. So a college is the soil. Okay. So if the college is not eligible to participate in these programs, these seeds are not going to do anything.
mhm,
So I can't open a university of toothpicks and say we're going to give somebody a toothpick degree in 4 years and get these Pell Grants. The Department of Education makes sure that colleges have viable programs for students to be employed once they graduate. This is
mhm,
realistic. Okay. So back to USC. The other application that is required on some private colleges, and how they will know that they're going to read the website, is the CSS profile. It's similar to the FAFSA. However, it asks a lot more questions. And the reason for that is the CSS profile is used for that private donor money,
mhm.
Oh,
whereas the FAFSA is used for federal and state aid. So when someone is completing the FAFSA, I'm going to use California for an example because that's my home state.
Mhm.
One of the things it asks for is your official state of residence. And the reason it does that is because most states also have their own financial aid programs. So if you list California as your official state of residence, your FAFSA information goes to the state of California education department for them to also try to give you some money.
oh,
Okay, so we're Joe Sixpack at USC. Okay. The other thing is with some schools, when students apply for admissions, that too can become a financial aid application. Here's the reason why: because the school can say, we really like their grades, or this person plays the cello really well, or this person is a student athlete. Those are based on a talent or skill. So
Mhm.
we're at USC. Joe Sixpack plays the cello. Okay. So, and he applies for admissions. So let's say USC is 50,000 with all those components. So
Mhm.
the USC will say, okay, let's give him the Pell Grant. State of California says, we're going to chime in. We're going to help him out. We're going to give him a Cal Grant for 7,000.
Mhm.
And so those two things that do not need to be repaid and is the best money because it's for need-based students. And then they'll say, you know what? Let's give this guy work study. So we'll give him work study. And then let's say he still has a deficit, he needs another 15,000 because he wants to live on campus or off campus somewhere. So that's where the loans come in.
Mhm.
okay. Okay.
So are these gratis? I mean, you fill out the application, but you don't need to follow up. You just get a notice from like the state or the Fed saying, here's your money."
Okay, if you will follow along this visual with me. Okay, so
Okay.
we talked about the soil being the school,
Mhm.
the FAFSA and CSS profile. Those are your seeds, right?
Mhm.
So the student will need to do something because after you've completed those two forms, you will receive something that's a transcript of what you entered. And they will ask, is this correct?
Mhm.
And if not, you can make updates or they may ask you for additional information. That additional information, let's say that's water.
Mhm.
So one of the things I tell students is that all financial aid is time sensitive. Read your snail mail, read your email, read your text messages, because these are the ways that schools are going to be in touch with you.
Mhm.
Okay.
The longer you wait, the less sympathy they have for you. It's very hard to convince a college that your emergency is their emergency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
After you've submitted requested documents, if you are asked for additional documents, the school will typically get back to you and say, okay, here's a award letter, and it's been renamed offer letter, and I'm going to water it down and tell you what that means. It's an eligibility letter. Okay. You will have these terms of award letter and offer letter. It's just an eligibility letter. This is what we're going to offer you to attend our school.
Mhm.
You can accept some of it or none of it. It's up to the student. They may decide, I only need 10 grand because mom and dad said they'll pay for these other things.
Mhm.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I do want to mention too, because I found it odd when I started in financial aid. Um, Students who are living at home, they still get a housing budget. It's lower than those students who live on campus or off campus, but there's still some cost that the school is willing to help you with to stay at home with mom and dad. Or if you're a returning adult and you're going to school, you can still get money, some money to help with household expenses, electricity, water, that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And you said that you have to then pay for these. We reapply every year. Can you just assume that, what you got that the first year, you're going to get the second year and the third and the fourth?
Oh, Robin, I am so glad you asked that question. Okay. Let me write some notes so I don't forget. The first thing for the 2023-2024 academic year, the formula to determine who's financially needy will change. This is the biggest overhaul of the formula in the 30 years that I've been in financial aid.
Wow. Okay.
Other thing to think about, and a lot of people don't, is politics. So you got money coming from the feds and states. So oftentimes there's a shakeup if there's a party change. I have seen students be eligible for a state grant one year, and the following year they're not eligible. Nothing about them changed, but the criteria changed because of who was in office.
Mhm.
Okay. Oh,
No, it's not a safe assumption to think that you can get it again or the same thing again. There may be some variations, but for the average person, they're not going to see huge variations, but it is possible.
does the school or the institution notify you that, well, you know what, our algorithm or whatever, our criteria has changed for this next year, so we're not sure if you're going to be eligible or you won't be eligible? Will they tell you in advance, or you just get denied sometime in October or later?
I've never known a school to be that proactive. Sometimes they try to stay out of politics, and that's what it's just getting into politics. Some schools can be very forthcoming and try to backfill those students who maybe their Pell Grant was reduced or their state grant was reduced. They say, you know what, wealthy schools, especially that have their endowment funds, will say, we're just going to give them an extra scholarship to make up the difference. And there are some schools that don't have any money to make up the difference.
Right. Wow.
So my recommendation to the audience is pay attention to politics and vote. this could have an impact on your financial aid.
Mhm.
Well, that's really good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, so if a student is denied because of this, political upheaval, whatever it happens to be, uh, and they still need the money, of course, to go to school, what other kinds of options do they have?
Okay. I want to start by saying most schools will not use the word denied.
Okay.
They will say, this is what we can offer you. Again, let's just say worst case scenario, the only thing they offer you is all loans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Not
One
denied.
of the things they will mention is, well, you can look for outside scholarships. And I do want to mention that scholarships are sort of everywhere. Okay. So let's go back to USC. Let's say we're going to USC.
Mm-hmm.
There are some donors who have scholarships for only USC students. And how would you know that? You need to read their website.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hmm. So you got to do a lot of research on your own.
Absolutely. And that's why I recommend the bigfuture.org. It's one-stop shop, because a lot of people I get it. It is confusing. It can be intimidating. It took me 2 years of working in financial aid for it to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand how overwhelmed people can be. So to take that being overwhelmed, let bigfuture.org help you navigate all these things that you need to monitor in life for.
Was that something maybe you should do a year before you need to apply?
Yeah, you can do that because you can already start looking and seeing what the schools cost,
Mm-hmm.
what their enrollment's like. One of the other things I want to mention, because it kind of goes along with financial aid, because a lot of things impact financial aid. When a student is applying to certain different schools or they're considering certain schools, my advice is to also find the student newspaper so you
Mm-hmm.
know what's really going on. Because admissions, of course, is going to show you all the cute girls at the football game and people happy and frolicking in the library. You're not going to really know what's going on that campus. And here's the reason why I say that. There was a school who had no heat in the winter.
Oh, wow.
And you're thinking, how does that relate to financial aid? Well, some students dropped out. They
Mm-hmm.
couldn't stay there because there was no heat in the winter. So this affects their financial aid. We might want that money back depending on when you dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
Your student loans may go into repayment depending on when you dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue is there was a school my son had applied to, and I started following the newspaper. They had a lot of racial issues. He had received an offer letter. He was ready to go. I saw these racial issues. They're demanding people to resign. I said, you're not going.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow.
Wow.
That wasn't on the school's website? Oh my God. Oh.
Yes. So, yeah, I really recommend reading the student newspaper. And oftentimes it's online, because, and of course, PR departments are doing social media, but you really want to know what's going on, read the student newspaper.
Mm-hmm. Mel, you mentioned once about, when your son was looking at going to college, that he actually went and talked to the Black Students Association too.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things we did. We went to the campus and found the president of the Black Students Association and sat down with that person to get the real, in quotes, skinny on what was really happening at the school before we talked to either the school counselor at his high school, or the financial aid counselors at the college. And we were able to get very valuable information.
Absolutely. And that's something I would like to encourage students and parents to do, is to go on tours.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to these colleges' website, most colleges will let you go on a tour any time of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes they are student-led tours, and the students will tell you what's going on or point out things. And sometimes the alumni.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to these open houses on campus, so to speak, where they want you to come and see what's going on. Some alumni will tell you, hey, look, these professors here, or you find that, let's say you want to be an illustrator at Disney, and you go to Kim's Toothpick College to learn art, right? And once you graduate, you learn that Disney only recruits from certain schools, or primarily recruits from certain schools for their illustrators. So my advice to students and parents, if you know what you want to do, work backwards. Find out where, let's say you want to work at a certain law firm. What law schools does this law firm typically get their students from? Their employees from?
Yeah.
When I worked at a law school, God, I can't remember what the name of the event was, but it was a huge recruiting event. They do one on each coast where all the law schools in the United States show up and recruit. And students have to, register for this and have completed their bachelor's degree. Well, somehow this young man came in. He was in high school. I don't know how he got in, but my hat off to him. And he wanted to know, what classes should I be taking to prepare myself to get to the best law school? And I thought that was genius.
Yeah. Wow. What did they say?
A lot of English classes.
Okay.
A lot of writing.
A lot of writing.
Reading.
Well, and since you brought up law students, can I ask, I don't want to go into, unless you want to, everything about graduate students, but does this October 1st deadline also apply to grad schools?
Thank you for bringing that up, Robin. That, again, is something that I neglected to mention. I do want to put this out there first, that grad professional students are not eligible for Pell Grants.
Okay.
And the reason for that is the federal government says, we want to help you to be a viable member of our community. And we can do that with a bachelor's degree. You don't need a law degree or a dental degree. You're on your own now. It's kind of like mom and dad cutting you off. You figured it out. However, I do want to mention that for graduate professional students, oftentimes schools will have their own money to give out. Because on the federal side, the only thing that's offered to graduate professional students are student loans. So there again, must read the websites.
Okay. Student loans. Is that all on that? Because I wanted to then get a little bit to the nitty gritty of some of the loans.
I do want to mention also, for some of the schools, they will have their own loan forgiveness programs. The law school where I worked, if students went into public interest, they would pay off some of their loans. So that way you could still go into that field and not be debt burdened.
Wow. So some public interest firms, and what other kind of places would do that? Forgive loans.
Well, the federal government. There are a few, and this is going to need to be another session, really going to need to be another session.
Okay.
There are different ways to have your loans forgiven, and that will need to be a different session.
Okay.
Are there some common mistakes that people make when they're applying for these loans that you should try to avoid? Is something that happens all the time that, if people knew about this, they would avoid that?
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that question. One of the things schools are required to disclose, and when you're doing the FAFSA, it will be disclosed for you, is what's the graduation rate of the students from that school. The other thing you can ask, as you mentioned about going to a campus, is asking what's the average starting salary for your graduates in this program. And I'm going to put an asterisk next to that because statistically, Black women have the largest student loan debt in the United States.
Wow.
And why is that? Because we're paid less than men, and we're paid less than other races. So we're kind of at the bottom there. So if, they tell you, average starting salary is 90, for a Black woman, it might be 70.
Wow. That's not
Yeah.
something I've heard about,
Nope. So that's one of the problems. Or you go into a field. I saw this woman. She was not Black, though. I saw this woman on World News Tonight a few years ago who had gone to Occidental College here in California's private college, majored in sociology, and was $120,000 in debt. And either she couldn't find a job or she wasn't making more than $40,000. And I'm standing there yelling at the TV. I'm yelling at the TV going, I know you did study abroad. You took summer classes, whatever you did. You took advantage of everything to get to 120,000. However, you didn't take into account that soft sciences are not in high demand.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that employers have approached the Department of Education saying, these colleges need to have more, offer more programs for our changing technology.
So STEM students are the only ones getting any money. So.
Yeah. Basically.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading that I don't know if a lot of colleges are doing that, but at least I know of one college that has just done away with tuition altogether.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you mentioned that.
So go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I want to hear your question.
Okay, my question is, should a student be looking for those types of colleges and then go there as opposed to, I mean, even if that, may not necessarily be their first choice, just to keep from getting in a lot of debt with student loans or getting involved in this financial aid program?
That's a loaded question. I would not encourage that unless the student really wants to go to a particular school. I did do a search. U.S. News and World Report has a ranking of 20 colleges that are tuition free. And some of them are things like agricultural colleges where you have to work on the farm to get your tuition paid for. Now, one of the things they have in California, I'm going to keep bragging about California, but other states do this too, is they have what they call these promise programs. And I'm going to pick on Cal State Long Beach. Okay. So Cal State Long Beach has pretty much said, if you go to Long Beach Community College, you come to Cal State Long Beach, you work and live in Long Beach, we will waive your tuition or we will pay your tuition.
Oh, wow.
The other thing is community colleges typically are a lot less expensive than starting out at a 4-year. However, they're not as prestigious. So a lot of people avoid them. However, at the end of the day, if you've done 2 years at a community college and then you graduate from Berkeley,
that's what people see.
Exactly. So you saved a lot of money. And in the state of California, most people can qualify to have their tuition waived at a community college.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And is it the same with other vocational types of schools, or are those mostly private? And I don't even know how to ask this question. Yes.
Okay, so vocational schools, for our audience, these are typically where students learn air conditioning, refrigeration, cosmetology, welding, construction technology. Those schools can be very expensive. However, some community colleges offer those vocational programs. So in California, our tuition at a community college is $46 a unit. However, that's often waived. But you can get financial aid for your living expenses, tuition, food, supplies, those kind of things to help you at a community college.
So are there other states that you know of that have community colleges, or is that something that is part of the student's investigation to find out about in terms of, taking care of their financial aid issues?
Most states have community colleges. They typically don't advertise a lot. They don't have a large advertising budget. These bigger, University of Phoenix, Grand Canyon University. Some of these private schools have a lot of money that they put toward outreach and promoting themselves.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I have experienced in all the years I've been doing this and go out to high school and talk to students and parents. You mentioned community college. It's almost like saying, well, your child should go to prison first. You know, but, oh no, that's not an option. We can't brag about my kid going to a community college. You know, okay, you pay now or pay later. And what ends up happening, they're paying later because they got a bunch of loans. You didn't, you couldn't brag about Johnny going down the street to the community college.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also want to mention, now that I talked about workshops, most people will have to pay for something at college, whether it be your own notebooks or your own food. You may have to come out of pocket. There are students who get what they call a quote unquote full ride scholarship. And that's typically to athletes who are extremely talented. And full ride means they're going to pay for all those things that total the cost of attendance or your academics. Now, I do want to stress, too, that you do not need to demonstrate financial need for some scholarships. So let's say, for example, Seth Curry decides to come to my toothpick university. I don't care what he makes, because I want him to be at my school to give my school some credit. So it's like, I'm just going to give you a scholarship to come to my school so you can help, put a name to my school. So I don't care what you make. So that's called merit aid. And that's something that students may see on websites. When schools describe what they're giving as merit aid.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if this is going to go off track, but so you'll know, Mel. But yeah. So I was thinking, so when you're person's in high school, should they try to, of course you should always try to do your best and all this, but to try to excel in something, like in the choir or the band or football, tennis or something like that, to really, make them eligible for this kind of merit aid or some other kind of scholarship, like for a D1 school or something?
I would say if they are truly interested in those fields, sure, excel at it, but don't try to get into something just to get extra money and you don't like it. Because it may not, come to fruition the way you want it to. You be stuck with this cello. You don't get a scholarship for it. My recommendation would be for any student to focus on your math and sciences. That's what really impresses schools, those grades in math and science. So if you're not a stellar football player or tennis player, you don't have a great voice, you don't want that cello, focus on your math and sciences.
Well, I know the music teacher at my son's school for the band, jazz band, he really wanted to play the saxophone. But she was saying, no, if you go into one of the other kind of instruments, like, trombone or, I forgot the name of the other one. Yeah, but like a trombone, they usually need to, schools need to fill that kind of position in college. And so they gave it a try and actually liked the trombone. So
great.
So I think, that is a possibility. It's good that she did, tell him about that too.
Right. But he was already in that direction.
Yeah, he was.
So if you take somebody like me that has no interest in playing the cello, and I decide, well, I'm going to try to play the cello because a lot of people play the cello. So I'm stuck with this big honking instrument. and it didn't turn out to be the cash cow I thought it was going to be.
Maybe you can sell it to buy books. I'm sorry, Mel, I interrupted you. You had another question?
My question is basically this. I mean, say a student's in the 11th grade, just about to graduate from that grade to the next grade, and is going to have to get serious about college. What's the first thing they need to do?
Bigfuture.org.
Okay.
Go there. All things college. It's all things college. I would encourage you to play around with it yourself. So you can see, and it's laid out very easy on the eyes. You can use it on a mobile device. You don't have a laptop. It's all things college.
Fantastic. Is this for
So would it
international
also
schools?
include grants and scholarships and from private organizations?
Yes, they have a scholarship search engine where the students can go in and answer some questions about themselves, because it's going to force you to think about everything that you are in addition to being Black. And then it'll sweep the Googleverse and let you know what scholarships you should apply for based on how you answered those questions. In addition, on bigfuture.org, it can help you with prepare for the SAT. And just by using their website, you go into drawings to get scholarships. So they have something like a planner, college planner or whatnot. And it's like, okay, this week we're going to give out 2 scholarships for $1,000 for people who have used this, and you go into a drawing for that. So they have they're really trying to entice people to use this. And it's the SAT people. It's free. It's reputable. I strongly recommend it.
Okay, I'll make sure it goes up on the website too. I mean,
Well, do they have programs for students like auditorium type programs where students, who will be graduating soon can get all this information or can start thinking about it? I mean, as a 16 or a 17 or maybe an 18-year-old, they don't really think about a lot of these things.
Right. Typically, schools will host what they call a financial aid night and invite the parents. One of the problems I've found with that is that it's only offered one night. So you may have some parents or students who couldn't make it that night. And when I would do workshops, I'd say, I can come back on a Saturday, or you want to do another one next week for people who can't leave on Thursdays. Maybe you do it on Wednesday or Friday. So they really need to pay attention to workshops that are being offered. In addition, sometimes workshops are offered at colleges. They're nearby colleges. We just hosted one for the community. It's like, you don't need to be registered here, but we're helping people fill out the application here.
excellent.
One of the things, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the things I want to mention is on the state level, states usually offer financial aid workshops. So how does a student find out? Let's say you live in Virginia. Go to Google, type in Virginia Department of Education. That will come up. Typically type in financial aid. They will let you know what's offered and if there are workshops coming up and where they are.
Oh,
Look at Robin. Yeah, girl.
that's great. Yes.
That's amazing.
I mean, when I was going to school, we didn't have the internet then anyway. So we're going through books and hoping that our college, high school counselors knew something, which they didn't. So they didn't tell you they didn't, but they. I do have. I've almost finished my espresso, but I do have a question about students taking a gap year.
Yes.
When would they start applying for financial aid?
During their gap year.
During the year. Okay. So they didn't do it before with the thought that, okay, the money is going to be available the following year when I'm starting. No, they do it during
their gap year.
Okay.
Well, I have a follow-up question to that, though. If they take a gap year, does that kind of count against them in terms of getting scholarships and grants and things like that?
I've never known a student to take a gap year and then have something bad happen with financial aid.
Okay.
Great. Well, now I have finished my espresso after I had a double.
Okay.
So interesting and helpful. Wow.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I wish my financial aid counselor at school was as knowledgeable and as nice, about the whole thing.
I do want to come back and do other segments because there's a lot to unpack with financial aid.
Oh, we definitely want you to come back, and and soon too, and
okay.
Because I think we don't want to go try to do too much in one segment. I'm glad you kind of reined me in on that because I was about to start going off.
I do want to mention this. For students who are currently enrolled in college and have not applied for financial aid, you can still apply for financial aid for this current academic year. There may be limited resources, but you can still apply.
Okay. What's the deadline? Do you know the deadline for that?
Yes, don't ask me what time the movie ends. The
Just
Okay.
have an
deadline is
application.
they need to have a valid application at the school by the last date of their attendance.
Oh,
Ooh,
mm,
okay, okay. So pretty much any time during that school year, go ahead and
Yes,
apply if you need it.
the sooner the better.
mm.
Yeah,
Okay.
you get to see more of the movie the earlier
Yeah.
you go to the movie.
Oh,
Good.
oh, and what about students having an emergency? They need some emergency funds or
Oh, that's
something.
a great question, Robin. There
Mm,
are some schools who have emergency funds.
mm,
Typically, they are given out, say, your car broke down, my house caught fire, I had emergency dental. Um, you don't need, in most cases, you don't need to be a financial aid recipient to get emergency funds from a college. It's typically offered to anyone who has a financial emergency. But again, read those websites to find out.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. No, that's really good to know because you have to be able to. I mean, you can't plan for an emergency, but you have to know.
Right. Yes. Schools want to keep you enrolled. So, if I have to pay for your root canal, Joe six pack, I'm going to pay for it so you don't drop out.
mhm, mhm.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kim. And
You're
this
welcome,
is
Robin. I
great.
really enjoyed this.
This has been amazing.
Great.
Yes, and we will really look forward to having another espresso with you soon to go over another aspect of financial aid.
Oh, yes. I'd love to cover many things.
Mhm.
I think we feel very lucky to have a great person who can do this and a woman of color who can and who understands really the needs of students, of many students that get
Yes.
overlooked. Yeah, and so thank you so much, and
You're very
see you
welcome.
soon.
Okay.
Ashe.
Well,
Thank you, Kim.
you're welcome.
This is where we are going to stop for today. But this conversation is very far from over. We're just getting started with financial aid, and Kim's going to walk us through this whole process. Asante Sana to Kim Bradley for sharing her knowledge and insights about financial aid. She was really just fantastic, wasn't she? She made me wish that I really had somebody who could have helped me during this process. And frankly, she just presented the information in a clear and easy manner. That's what many well meaning college counselors actually lack. They want to, but sometimes they just don't reach people like Kim has. But she also gave us information that's not available from in many places. I don't want to, harp on college counselors. They're doing their best. But as Kim said, don't just go to one person or one place. Look around, go to bigfuture.org, look around at all these different places because you may have to put it all together like a puzzle, but it's worth it. It's worth the work. One very important piece of information was the website, bigfuture.org. Kim emphasized that. It's so important to go there. Yet remember and keep going there when you're getting ready to apply to college. Kim recommended actually that you start in your junior year of high school, but you can start anytime. You can go there just for fun. You can find the link to at the espressotalktoday.com website. Another great point, boy, there were so many great points that Kim made. Remember, avoid focusing on only deadlines. Kim described that as going to a movie and asking what time the movie ends. You don't care what time it begins, you only care what time it ends. Start as soon as possible. You don't want to get just the leftovers or, as my mother would say, the leave-ins. So don't just look at the final date, start well before that. Final dates, because you do have to know them. The deadline was for 2020, October 1st. It is next year too. That has passed, but keep submitting your applications anyway. You might not get as much as you wanted or the type of financial aid that you're hoping for, but you're likely to get some form of financial support from the federal or state government or from the school itself. Who knows, you might get exactly what you're looking for, but don't talk yourself out of it because the deadline's passed. And then of course, remember October 1st, every single year. You're going to need to apply every year for financial aid. So remember, October 1st, October 1st, October 1st. Don't just focus on that though. Start September 1st if you like. Finally, I really liked and appreciated how Kim was so enthusiastic and positive about financial aid. Applying for and paying for college can really be frustrating and confusing, but Kim helped me to see that the right mindset and the right attitude during this process will make it much easier, much more pleasant, and it can really even feel like an empowering experience. Now I have great news for you. Kim Bradley is going to return to the Espresso Talk Today podcast show next month. That's right. Yes, she is going to talk with us about alternatives to financial aid. That's right. Financial aid is not the only game in town to pay for college. And Kim's going to talk with us about these alternatives and how you can apply for them. I hope you'll join us for the next uncommon and empowering show. And if you have questions, Kim loves questions, I love questions, or you have comments, I love comments too, please send them to me at team@espressotalktoday.com. I read and respond to all the questions and comments. Yes, it's hard work, but you're worth it. You can also follow us and communicate with us on Instagram at Espresso Talk Today or on Facebook at the Espresso Talk Today podcast page. Asante Sana again to Kim Bradley for participating on the show, and a big Asante Sana to you for joining us. I'm Amma Robin at Espresso Talk Today. And remember, y'all, strength, soul, and reparations. Ashe.